is never morally permissible. And so, it must always be opposed, and that goes for, other areas such as human cloning, embryonic research. And so a lot of the focus from the Catholic Conference in the decades that we have been around has been on this issue. Just to give you an update of where we are on that, 2018 we passed the trigger ban that would allow the state to outlaw abortions if Roe versus Wade was overturned. Fast forward a few years, and we had the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. Praise God, but also has now brought additional challenges and opportunities. So when Roe was decided, our trigger ban went into effect, and the state immediately outlawed nearly all abortions, those except for in the cases of medical necessity, which is defined pretty specifically and pretty stringently in the law. So, as you can imagine, lawsuits have followed, challenges, and where we are is, for those that don't know, there's now becoming a big push for ballot initiatives, for citizens to bring up initiatives that would seek to amend the state constitution. This is what happened this week in Ohio, is what's happened in other states in some form or fashion, where proponents of abortion are seeking to circumvent sort of the legislative process and do a popular referendum and amend a constitution such that the legislature can't outlaw or regulate abortion. We have had multiple potential initiatives filed by two groups, two individuals, and those are currently just to kind of, and we can go into more detail if folks want, but just as kind of a quick summary, those are currently tied up in litigation over the ballot summary as prepared by our Secretary of State. He is still looking to appeal the most recent decision, but those are out there right now, and all of them would in some form or fashion seek to roll back our pro-life protections. So as a conference, that's something we are keeping a close eye on. We are working with a couple different coalitions as to how to address that if it gets on the ballot, because I can say quite frankly, our track record as pro-lifers on these ballot initiatives have not been good so far. We are winless in the last handful.
And if that happened now, would it take a simple majority, 60%, 62%?
It would take a simple majority. So to get something on the ballot, you first have to go through the steps of going to Secretary of State, having your language, and then the Secretary of State will then provide a ballot summary. So Secretary of State Ashcroft provided a ballot summary that was immediately challenged. In the circuit court here in Cole County, the language was deemed to be biased, and so the judge then took kind of a somewhat remarkable step of not just kicking it back to the Secretary of State, but of rewriting the ballot summary. So there was an appeal that went to the Western District Court of Appeals, and that has been, they also ruled against Secretary of State Ashcroft. But under the current scenario, once they get the ballot language finalized, the group can go and collect signatures, and you have to have, I think it's 8% in 6 of the 8 congressional districts. So we're talking they will need about 170 some odd thousand signatures to get it on the November of 2024 ballot for then everyone to vote on. And as Brian stated, to win, to get added to the Constitution, to be successful, you only have to have a majority. You have to have 50% plus one person to then get it enshrined in the Constitution. And so there's a big, quite frankly, there's a big concern because we are still dealing with the fallout of anger, I think, and the blowback from the Dobbs decision that. I say we as a pro-life community, not just the church, but for all the pro-life groups, I think are struggling now with how do you craft a message that will win on this issue, because the public is not for, if you look at polling, the public is not for necessarily abortion up until birth, but the problem that we're seeing is they tend to be voting that way right now. on these ballot initiatives, the ones that are written generally enough that they could allow for unregulated abortion, but not even just that. That we have in Missouri, we have protections in at the time, when Roe was still in effect. We have parental notification statutes. We have all sorts of clinic inspections. All of that now has the potential to be rolled back. And so again, I know we have a variety of issues to talk about, but I guess kind of as the final, unless others have other questions, is we are in the unique and somewhat unfortunate position of when Roe was the law of the land, we had, for all intents and purposes, regulated Planned Parenthood out of the state. And now that's not to say things were perfect, that we have women going across the border to Illinois and Kansas, but we had nearly ended abortions in the state of Missouri within our border. And now we are in the kind of, like I said, unfortunate and unique position of, in a post-Roe versus Wade world, actually, we have the potential to fall back further than where we were when Roe was still in effect. And I just say that we plan going forward. We're in contact with all the other pro-life organizations, and this will be obviously an area that we stress very heavily at the conference. And I would really encourage those here that are engaged in the political process, that are engaged on this issue, to be out in your community and talk about this. The first step will be, if it gets on the ballot, we need individuals out there, telling folks, do not sign anything. If someone approaches you with a petition of, hey, just sign this. This is for women's health care. This is for whatever. Just say, I'm going to go. I'm going to research it, and then they can always come back. But that is the concern. And just to give kind of the scope of what we're dealing with is, again, I think I may have better information in the second row here, but we were down to under, I think, 200 abortions in the state of Missouri, in some of the most recent numbers I had seen. But if you look back, our historical high was in, I think, the early 80s. We were talking close to, I think, 20,000 abortions a year in the state of Missouri. And so that's kind of what we're up against now on that issue. Legislatively this session, I don't know that there'll be much that will be done specifically on it, because this is now a fight for the constitutional initiative. My assumption will be that the General Assembly will try to make another run at addressing what you have brought up, Brian, of trying to make it harder to amend the Constitution, of trying to change that standard in some way, to make it to where to amend and put anything in the Constitution, it should be a higher threshold than 50% plus one. So that's something to be watching for this year, that I think that will be, to the extent that there's any movement on that type of abortion-specific legislation, that will be it. The other thing that while we're talking about this issue, that I think we'll see in the upcoming session, and that we always try to support where possible, is one of the benefits that has come out of the post-Dobbs landscape legislatively is that I think we have more of a bipartisan discussion going on currently in the legislature of, no one really quite knows yet can agree upon what a pro-family, pro-woman, pro-child social policy looks like. But folks are starting to try to think outside the box in this area. Instead of addressing the supply of abortion, addressing the demand from that side of whether that's funding for increased child care, whether that's continued funding and tax credits for donations to pregnancy resource centers, you name it. Because when a woman is abortion-minded, in most instances, something has gone wrong. There's a need that needs to be met there. And so to the extent that the legislature can kind of start coming together on these issues, my hope is that you'll see more of this outside the box, whether it's child tax credits or another one I suspect will probably get a little bit of play next year. And so those are not abortion-specific, but I think in a post-Dobbs and a post-Roe versus Wade world, I sense that will be, to the extent that you can focus on that issue at the legislature, we'll see a little movement in that regard as well. So that's where we are on abortion. One that will be a much quicker probably discussion is our work on the death penalty. Obviously church teaching, and I think there's still some confusion when in regards to the death penalty of, has the church kind of changed her stance on this issue? The most recent catechism says the death penalty is inadmissible, and mostly because I think we're coming to a stronger consensus on, that everyone has inherent dignity, including those that have done tremendously heinous things. And also from the standpoint of the developed world, we're getting to where life in prison can be life in prison, that you don't have to necessarily end the life. The state doesn't have to be in the business of executing an individual for society to be safe, that life in prison can be life in prison. I say this will be a short portion of the talk because unfortunately, as good as we have been as a state on the abortion issue, we have not made much progress on the death penalty here in the state. It's a difficult issue. And the example I always give is we have a Republican member of the House who will typically file every year a bill to repeal the death penalty in the state of Missouri. So Republicans have a supermajority of both chambers. They rule. They have every statewide office. This is a Republican-sponsored piece of legislation, and as part of the legislative process, you introduce a bill, and then the speaker, if you're in the House, will then send it to a committee. Then if it gets through the committee, it goes to the floor. You have your votes and all of that. This bill typically doesn't get to a committee. Even under the same political party, the leadership typically, won't send it to a committee, or if it goes to a committee, it won't ever come up. And so, it's an area we continue to work on. The bishops of the state write a clemency application for every individual on death row. Sometimes that's hard. Some requests and stories are a little easier than others. Some of these individuals have done very, very evil and bad things, but the bishops still continue, to seek mercy in all of these instances. So, that's sort of the work we do there, and it's tough. We had an individual that was in our office that had done this work for close to 40 years, and it's tough, when you don't see the results. But it's something we continue to work on. And then I think the other one, before we kind of open up to more general questions, that was on the advertisement that I think most people want to know about is what's going on with gender identity issues at the Capitol. This has sort of become the issue, I would say, nationally and statewide. So obviously, as the church, we have very strong feelings on that. As individuals, we are both body and soul. That cannot be separated, and that we are all made, male and female. So how does that then look on a public policy point of view? How do we come in as the church on this issue where, we have a very, very strong, theology and background and teaching on this issue, but then how does that then interplay with what the legislature is doing? And so in the past couple sessions, there's been a push really to focus on gender transition in regards to minors. Obviously what adults do, that in some instances, legislators aren't too keen on regulating that when an adult chooses to do. But when it comes to a minor that is suffering from gender dysphoria, that then goes to a clinic and has the potential to be given puberty blockers. How this usually goes is you go in, there may or may not be a proper sort of full psychological, mental, emotional, physical evaluation, but for a child that is really experiencing, at least in the minds of the workers, of the doctor, that they're experiencing gender discordance, gender dysphoria, that to start they will potentially put this individual on puberty blockers, and what they will say is, proponents of this is, it's just meant to slow the process down. Nothing's irreversible. It's just meant to give a child the opportunity to decide whether he or she, is truly wanting to change genders. The flip side of that is, and kind of what they don't tell you, is what follows that. It tends to be then the hormones and the cross-sex hormones and stuff. And statistically, what folks have seen is, what seems to bear out in the research is whether or not puberty blockers just put a pause, which I think there's still some disagreement there. The vast majority of children that go on puberty blockers will almost 100% of the time then go to hormones. So this has been an issue in the General Assembly. This last session, we had a group of Republicans that made a push and got a limited ban on the practice. They had, the way the law was written and went into effect in August was that it basically banned, chemical and surgical procedures for gender transition on minors, with the exception of those that if you were going to WashU or you were going to University of Missouri as a child and you were in the middle of a treatment, that they negotiated, the legislators negotiated to say that if you were already undergoing treatment, then you could still continue that treatment. But for any new patients, as of August, it is a banned procedure. Now, what the legislature also did, which was clever, was add a, when all else fails, you add a cause of action. As an attorney, if you want to really stop stop a particular activity, open them up for a lawsuit. And so the bill also provided pretty broad malpractice and potential cause of action for individuals that could come back later after, say, 20 years. And I don't have the specific how long they extended it out, but would allow individuals to come in and sue a doctor that, grew up, start to regret the process, saying that they were harmed, they could go and sue. So the practical aspect of that is as of, I think, 2 months ago, both the University of Missouri and Washington University announced that they were ceasing to provide the medical and chemical puberty blockers to even those children that could apply under the law. So even those that were already undergoing treatment, they said, we're out. We're not going to be engaging in that because it was too heavy of a legal liability, which leads to some follow-up questions, probably of if you're that concerned of legal liability, that we maybe need to be rethinking our medicine in that regard. So, but that's an area, and women's sports is another one. The kind of the protect women's sports, of seeking to protect the integrity and the safety of women and keeping sports separated by biological sex. And so these are issues that, honestly, get this, even more than abortion, I think has gotten very contentious over at the Capitol, and I think it lends to, I have a harder time as a representative of the church coming in and being heard on these types of issues. Even compared to something like abortion, the dialogue around this issue is not great at the moment, but where we come in and what I tell people is, we are here again recognizing the dignity of everyone. And so what I would say on this issue specifically is, you will get sometimes children coming in great distress with their parent testifying at some of these hearings, and I'll be honest, they're suffering. They're suffering. No one doubts that. But what you will hear in sort of what has become some of the arguments for this transition procedure is, you want to erase me. That if I disagree with an individual on the course of treatment, you just want to act like transgender people don't exist. And I think the church gives us a pretty clear view that, one, I speak as a representative of the conference and also as Jamie Morris, the individual. I don't want to erase anyone, but even if I did, I couldn't. because again, that individual is made in the image and likeness of God and has an inherent dignity, and we have to remember that when we're engaging individuals on this issue. Now, that doesn't mean we think that this method of treatment is correct, and in fact, what we would say is we love you so much that, you know, we don't want you going through some sort of medical procedure that we think could be harmful and that you may regret the rest of your life. You know, and so that's kind of what we tried to bring as a conference, you know, to these issues is, you know, we need to be engaging in truth. We need to be, but we also need to be engaging in charity. And that gets difficult. And I will say personally, I've got a family group over in this direction that can attest to that's not always easy for me. That's not always, you know, that has not always been my personality. But I think that is an area that just in general, when it comes to these types of hot button issues, we have to, all of us, you know, do a good job of remembering that we can disagree vehemently on these issues, but you know, like in the instance of that child that's coming in that maybe thinks he was born in the wrong body, that is still an individual that is going through, you know, hurt and pain. We just disagree on how the treatment should go. And so that's kind of how we tried to do, you know, our work at the Capitol. As I say, we've got a million issues that we could be involved in. A lot of our time is also spent telling people no. That I was telling a gentleman before we started that, you know, whenever I came into the position, I was talking with my then boss and just said, hey, do you ever have trouble being a representative of the church? Do people shut the door on you? And he said, no. Actually, we have to tell people no more than we do, you know, beg them to let us in. And that has been my experience, is that for all the differences over, you know, and we upset both parties pretty equally most of the time. They want, at the end of the day, they do want to be seen as supportive of the church. They want the church's stamp. Now, they may want our stamp on one issue and turn around the next day and say, why is the church involved in this issue? Yeah, y'all shouldn't have an opinion on this. You know, this is, but it's sort of the world we live in. And I guess, you know, before I open up questions, I would just say to you, to those out, you know, in the fight and in the world on this, is we have to always remember to let, hopefully, our faith guide our politics and not vice versa. And a lot of what I'm seeing in regard to some of the trouble in the dialogue is just folks want to look at this as in the lens of partisanship, and to the extent that we as a church, you know, really don't fall. Now, on certain issues, obviously we align with one party more than another, and another issue we'll align with the other side. But I think, you know, as Catholics, we have to remember to let our faith guide our politics on this stuff. And again, to engage people in charity. These are tough issues that we're dealing with, you know, dealing with immigration issues, dealing with what's the best way to help you know, a poor mother in need. There are a lot of ways we can get to the answers on this, but and things can get heated, but we always have to remember to engage these things in charity. And you can do that without watering down your message, but I think is really just would be sort of my other practice point, or my other little nudge to folks is just remember that, you know, difficult issues, but we can still control how we engage and how we relate to others, and treat them as an individual worthy of dignity and respect as well. So that's kind of I say quick, but you know, my version of quick is probably different than most folks. So working in politics and the law, my version of quick is, yeah. Is it tomorrow yet, Brian? I saw you looking at your phone. So, you know, are there any questions, whether it's on these types of issues, on whether it's where does the church come down on you know, something outside of this? And I think the best way would be if folks want to either raise their hand, stand up, and I'll call on you. And because I think I'm sure folks have other questions. I would hope so. No one. Brian, I know you came with a list. You start as. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Let me make sure I understood what you said. Let me understand a little bit more. I used to lobby at Capitol for several years myself. Are we saying that in the gender
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, we disagree that folks are, you know, just that you're born in a wrong body. You know, that is our foundation as a church. That's the foundation principle. The legislation that we're seeing, though, is more specific and targeted to the procedures. And so, you know, and it's not just with this issue, but a lot of issues. You know, we have very specific positions of the Catholic Church that we use as our foundation. But when it comes to, at least in my position, and this is, you know, we're working at the Capitol, you know, I have a little different perspective, is I can still only lobby on what the legislature proposes. And so while we have a foundation that obviously we believe God created them, male and female, he created them. And as I said before, that we are a combination of body and soul, that's important, and we shouldn't be, you know, mutilating children or anyone's bodies who feel that they are born in the wrong body. But from a specific, you know, what legislation have we been able to support? The legislation has been much more targeted and specific, related to pediatric gender care, quote unquote. And I don't know if that answers your question. I don't mean to give the impression that we come in and say, well, you know, we don't care or we're for it if it's regulated properly. You know, our foundation is still our foundation, but we are constrained by what the legislature proposes. Mhm.
His position from a law enforcement perspective in a lot of these decisions. Yet, has anyone ever discussed the fact that abortion, choice to kill a child, is murder, and that there doesn't ever seem to be anyone to introduce any type of legislation that says if a mom offers the child up to death, that person should be considered for murder. And yet, I could murder your son or daughter, or you, or anyone, I would be put up for murder. So this is what I keep hearing the issue that we try to facilitate the mother in every situation, but we don't seem to facilitate the child that's really there to say, this child was killed, period.
I think,
So if I go out and kill a child over here at St. Joseph School tomorrow, I'm going to be held for murder.
yeah.
But if they walk into an abortion clinic, well, you know, this is what it is. So I'm asking, has that ever been considered by our government, or the position of that, or anyone else?
I will say, and first I'll tell you how it's been considered, then I'll explain. That has been proposed, and I will say all of the pro-life organizations that I work with actually came out in opposition of that specific provision. Because how, and I don't say it's even just from the Catholic Conference perspective, but from the pro-life, you know, from all the pro-life lobbyists, whether it's the Missouri Right to Life, whether it's Deacon Sam Lee in St. Louis who runs Campaign Life, you know, obviously that is a human being. That child is a human being. Where the pro-life movement has always landed on this issue, though, is that there may be instances the mother is coerced. I think we always like to kind of go to the most extreme example of, well, you know, what about the mom, that it's basically just glorified birth control. But I think things are a little more complicated in a lot of instances than that. And it kind of goes back to, this is my personal opinion, is that in most instances, if a woman is contemplating abortion, something has gone wrong somewhere. You know, whether it's she's being coerced by a boyfriend, a husband, you know, whether there's, and this may not suffice for some, but, you know, I would also say that the law does treat folks differently sometimes, depending on intent, depending on circumstances, depending on coercion. And so this is kind of just another extension of that, is that, you know, from the view of I think traditionally and historically from the pro-life perspective, not just in Missouri but nationwide, the view has always been that the woman in a lot of instances is also a victim in this, or could be coerced. And in that regard, you know, has not sought to then seek punishment on the woman, but, you know, obviously the abortionist, or if she's being coerced, you know, those individuals, but have not sought punishment on the woman. And the abolitionist movement is becoming, we see a couple bills, we see a bill every session, I think, that will be filed. They typically don't get very far. I don't want to get in trouble here. My personal opinion is that sometimes I don't think they help the overall cause of the pro-life movement. And I think, now I know that for some it's, what does it matter? A child is being killed. But from a practical standpoint, I don't think it helps us, even just speaking as a lobbyist, putting aside the morality and everything. I don't think those tend to help our cause, and I think do damage to it. Like I said, it's usually you'll get a bill here and there every session. So it is discussed, but not a very popular proposal. Actually. Yeah, and again, it kind of all goes back to, in a lot of instances, these women are being coerced, or there's a lot of trouble here, and you're just kind of making for more obstacles of, whether it's, proving that it was just a miscarriage. So no, I think that's a good point. Brian?
Seemed to be a difference in the way the Texas law was crafted, where it goes after anybody else could bring that. I'm not going to misspeak it. So there's some nuances there that are proving valuable to the framework of other laws in other states, or not?
The Texas law was successful. For those that don't know, there was a law that would basically give a cause of action, again, allow someone to sue that let's say, I transport someone, across state lines, or I take someone in for an abortion. And it proved to be, and from a practical standpoint, very successful in cutting the number of abortions. For a state like Missouri, at the time that Texas came up with theirs, we really weren't seeing the number that Texas was seeing. And I think from a legal standpoint, I have questions that if someone were to have brought a challenge to that law, whether that law would have stuck. But there are options that states are looking at in regards to trying to address the issue of, as I say, in Missouri, even if things go well with this ballot initiative, we have women that we know are being talked into crossing into Illinois for an abortion. And so, how do you address that? That's something that we continue to try to work on. And again, it's got to be some combination of whether it's deterrence on one hand, but also what is that woman missing that we are not providing here? Why is that woman, kind of backing up to the initial question of why is she seeking an abortion? And how can we, and this isn't even just something legislatively, but how as we as the pro-life community, how do we get to her before Planned Parenthood does? Because, I've seen, Kathy has seen, everyone that has attended some of these hearings on abortion issues. You have young women that genuinely come in and believe and know Planned Parenthood had my best interest in mind. But for whatever reason, it's for right or wrong, Planned Parenthood was able to offer them at least the feeling of comfort and safety, and I am with you, that sometimes they feel like they don't get elsewhere. And so that's a broader issue than legislation, but how do we as Catholics, how can we be that first contact to reach a woman and say, no, we care for you, what do you need? And there are just a tremendous amount of ministries and groups that I think are doing this very well nationally, but it's going to take all these. It's going to take, changes to the law. It's going to take, upping our game in regards to our ministry, and just being, the bishop's, push to the Walking with Moms in Need, of that whole, we've got to be doing it from every aspect of our society, of meeting these women's needs and these men's needs, so that they don't initially, that their first thought isn't to go to Planned Parenthood, because that's the safe option. That's where, someone won't judge them. That's all of the things that we hear and we may disagree with, but for that woman, that's the place where she can go and not have judgment and not, and feel safe. And as much as we will disagree with that's her experience, and we've got to do a much better job. And we are doing it. I mean, there are great ministries and great people that have been doing this work for decades, but we just got to redouble our efforts. So. That was one area that, again, going back to all of the regulations that we've been, and I say we, I have been the beneficiary of a lot of hard work decades before I ever got to the conference from all of the pro-life organizations in the state. We had, before the Roe decision, or before Roe was overturned, pretty stringent requirements on how abortions are to be performed. And so there's language in there saying, has to be, in the presence of a doctor, no telemedicine. So from the perspective of those laws, that will cut against, being able to do sort of a telemedicine medical abortion. Having said that, the issue comes up of, that's great for regulating it from a doctor or a pharmacy. How do you address the issue of sort of a woman can go on eBay, a woman can go here and there, and that's something that has been, there's been proposals, I'd say most of the years I joined conference 2018, I think most of those years we have had proposals seeking to make more stringent penalties for those that would facilitate the illegal use of abortion drugs, your black market. Again, I mentioned his name earlier, but Deacon Sam Lee from Campaign Life tells the anecdote that he has a bottle of abortion medication from whatever country that he was able to purchase, whether it was off eBay or I forget the specifics behind it, but that's a tougher one to crack because if it's being done sort of in that black market, go to some Chinese website and punch in some information and get it delivered to your door. That's difficult, but the legislature and the groups involved are aware and working, but that's a tough one. So, but as far as like a doctor being able to prescribe medication abortions, there was no telemedicine abortions or anything like that. So that was how it was addressed from that perspective. Actually, I'm going to go with someone different here real quick. Rick, I'll get back to you, Brian.
Jamie, I'm Deacon Rick Telfors from St. Peter's, and tonight we have brought our RCIA group over. This is our first field trip.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Rick should have done he did you all dirty on this one.
Florida, we made it to the
Oh.
But what I'm saying, thanks for being our guest speaker tonight for our class. We meet on Thursday.
Very.
Well, one of the things we've been talking about in our sessions is the role of the magisterium, the authority of the church, plays in the formation of our own moral compass, if you will. Could you discuss in maybe some general terms how the four bishops of the state, you are, as you said, the board of directors, and how your public policy council, what the role of the magisterium, what the role of the catechism, how they incorporate church doctrine and dogma into their discussions and decisions on whatever the issue may be that you guys go and work on.
Sure. Just from a high level point of view, is the bishops have a teaching role, and what they will do is try to teach on matters of faith, morals, and try to educate so that those of us, again, going back to having a well-formed conscience, to try to get us equipped to be able to apply church teaching to a specific issue. As far as the work with the conference, typically how it will go is, let's just say we have kind of a new issue that arises, a new piece of legislation that we haven't seen before, is we'll discuss it internally with staff. Our public policy committee is sort of that first line where we meet with them almost monthly. They will come down either via Zoom or come down to Jefferson City, and we will meet with them and discuss the issue. and the staff will have put together kind of, I'll look at something and say, well, here's the Catholic teaching on issue X that I think applies here. We kind of look at it as a staff, we kick it around and go, this is an issue that the church has something to say. This is an issue that we think it is prudent and it is necessary for the church to be involved. So we will write up kind of our recommendation, take it to our public policy committee, and try to get just administratively try to get a vote on this. And then the bishops will oversee that. We'll take it to the bishops. For what I call big ticket items, I go straight to the board, and that is consultation amongst me, staff, and the bishops on is this a role for their office where they think we need to be taking a position. If it's a big enough issue, is this one that they need to really weigh in on, that use their office to say, we are going to issue statements, we're going to get more hands-on and involved and make statements through us as the combined board of directors, the bishops of the state of Missouri. And so we do. It sounds kind of boring, but it's a lot of discussion, a lot of discernment on some of these. Now, some are slam dunks. I mean, we kind of go back to some of these abortion bills. That there's not much of a discussion to be had there. But there are other issues where it's not as clear that is a particular issue one that the church should even be involved in. And so, that's just something that we kind of work on as a group with the approval of the bishops to determine, this is one we should be involved in, or, I don't know that we, as the Catholic Conference, this is something that reasonable minds could disagree, and you could have a couple different ways to get to this particular issue. Or it's more of a procedure issue, not a moral issue, those types of things where we go, no, we're going to stay out of this one, but overall, that's sort of administratively kind of how we do our work. And then again, overall, the bishops view their role as teachers here, but are very cautious with what they put their stamp on. If it's something that they don't think is necessarily, if it's more either partisan or more procedural or whatever you want to call it, then I think there is more of a hesitation that should we be involved in that. But these are all discussions that we, on a constant basis have. First amongst my staff, then the public policy committee, and then ultimately the bishops. And I will say, I'm not just saying this because this is being recorded and hopefully it gets to the right ears and eyes, but the bishops have been, in my experience, very very receptive to us and have been very good to work with on these, and really do value our and the PPC's opinion when we come to them and say, hey, we think this is an issue we should be involved in. And so sometimes you'll get someone that may be in a fit of, shall we say, I don't know. They'll be a little aggravated on something that is done or not done. We'll go, oh, do they even talk about this? Do they even know what's going on? And I can say yes, they do. And and they do take their role in regards to what I do very seriously. And we don't. I can't say I always get it right. Again, if we're recording, they almost always get it right, of course. But but no. I mean, we do the best we can on some of these issues, and like I said, I can't guarantee you it's right every time, but we do our best. So. Yeah. Yep. Sure. See, Brian's going to be upset now. He only has one, but we'll get to Brian's second after yours. We'll get to. Yeah, I would say, depending on the state, yes, that we have lost on some of these ballot or on all the ballot initiatives thus far. Yeah.
Is compromise really okay? To me, abortion is abortion and it's wrong. How can I compromise and say, oh, well, you can't do it at 9 months, but 6 months, 3 months, that's okay.
Yep.
No, that's not how I feel.
I've got good.
I don't think I can compromise personally on something like that.
Yeah, I've got kind of a good news, bad news. Good news is I think about this all the time, this question. Bad news is I have yet to come up with an answer on this. But this is sort of, this is the question now. And, you know, for a state like Missouri, you know, we banned abortion, and thanks be to God. What I think we're finding out, though, is that the general public, especially the voting public, is not with us on this. And what's frustrating, though, and difficult is, and again, I'm going to speak sort of also from the lobbyist point of view of just the politics of it all. Obviously, 100% agree on you know, that it's a life regardless of in any sort of date you can put on it, 8 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, you know. The difficulty is I don't have a great answer on this. I really don't. And I think there's kind of competing views out there of, well, for a state like Missouri, do we compromise? My questions on that would be, do we think that would still get us to the point where we save most of our pro-life laws? Say, if you were to put in hard case exceptions, rape, incest, that type of thing. I think what we're seeing, first the reality of it, I think what we're seeing right now, which is upsetting, is that even in a state like Ohio, you know, they don't win by the margin they win by if they're getting folks that, some of the folks that voted in favor may actually be ones that say, hey, you know, abortion should be regulated a little bit in second trimester and definitely shouldn't be allowed in third trimester. But for whatever reason, if the choice is, you know, no abortion or all abortion, right now they're defaulting to all. And that's the problem right now, that not just as a Catholic, but for what I do, I don't have a great answer for that. You know, I don't know if it becomes sort of I've described it as the reverse. John Paul II, Gospel of Life, you know, there was a discussion St. John Paul II had in discussing, you know, advocating for pro-life laws, saying that, you know, you must support life in all stages, but then recognizing the reality that at the time, you know, in Missouri is the prime example of this, is that, you know, when you cannot outlaw all abortion in every instance, it is okay to then take the best option in front of you and say, well, you know, if the choice is, you know, abortion through 9 months, or we can get a limit after 15 weeks, that's acceptable. I don't know how that looks in 2023 when, like in Missouri, it's almost the reverse of that. When you have everything you want, but it's looking like there's a chance that it could all be taken away. Hypothetically, if, and I think this is a big if, you know, putting in exceptions, if that saves the greater law, if that saves the law, you know, it's an interesting question. And like I say, I think about it all the time. It's why I have the problems I do, and you know, why I have no personality. But it's I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because part of me wants to say, no, you cannot compromise. I also know the reality of it is that right now we are completely, when it's on a ballot, when the choice is, and this is overly simplistic, but when the choice is you ban it all or you allow it all, they're choosing this one. But also I would say, you know, I don't know that adding exceptions would stop this right now. You know, I don't know that necessarily adding exceptions, you know, for rape and incest, fetal abnormalities. We would never support that, you know, as a conference. But even, you know, I don't even know that I can say, as someone that kind of watches this stuff and follows it, that, you know, I don't know that that would even be politically successful in staving off the rest of it. So, yeah, Kathy.
I was just gonna say that here in Missouri, we have come so far, and to accept anything is to go back,
Yeah.
and we don't wanna go back. So we have to work really hard so we don't go back, and part of that is educating people.
Yeah.
Here in Missouri, Planned Parenthood and ACLU and these people that brought these up are fighting amongst themselves. Planned Parenthood has not even given their support to one of these initiatives because it is not extreme enough.
Yeah, so to,
And no matter what happens, whatever we do, if we were to give an inch, they will take a mile.
well, and that goes back to, like I said, I think in our current political climate, I agree that I don't think that there's going to be what I call sort of a relief valve. I don't think there's going to be anything that can be done that will change their playbook of, you know, I mean, right now, if I were on their side, if I were doing, why shoot for something less than what than everything right now? Because that's the way the political winds have turned. But it is leading to an interesting, because a lot of the same sort of discussions that we had as a pro-life movement over the last few decades is sort of what I think the abortion side, pro-abortion side is having now, of exactly what you've pointed out of, you know, they're now approaching this as, do you incrementally chip away, or do you go for the whole thing? And, you know, we had, I think, was it 4 or 6 of the new batch of IPs? Do you remember, do you recall? Good. The 6, yeah, of the second.
But all of them can be read
Yes.
that it will be at birth, right before birth, that
Yeah.
your children will not be able, well, your children will be able to have an abortion without you knowing about it. Conscience protections are gone.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is gone. They can all be written to that. And also, we will pay for it.
Yep.
Because we cannot discriminate, and these initiatives say you cannot discriminate.
Yeah, and that's, and so that's what I was going to say is, you have those on sort of the pro-abortion side pushing these, that even taking that, and what she's referring to is a lot of these will seemingly have limits, whether it's gestational, whether it's exceptions. But if you really get down, you know, there's no definition or a very general definition of, say, a health of a mother exception. Well, what we know from, you know, Roe versus Wade and on is that those typically are read broadly to mean, if there's, say, a medical exception to have an abortion, that could be emotional, financial, familial concerns, you know, to where the exception swallows the whole thing, where it's, and so even taking that into account, there are some that look at the last 6 that were filed that are seemingly, on the surface, look more moderate, and saying, no, those aren't even good enough, even though I think, you know, you can read those to exactly that. You can read those to open the door for everything, because the exceptions, you know, are just gigantic. And so,
And it's supposed to be a Republican.
on those 6, yeah,
No one in the pro-life movement knows who this person is.
yeah, and I think out of, I don't know if they had ties, that she had ties to Missouri, but it's, yeah, so it's an interesting dynamic in that their side seems to be more fractured now over the strategy, which could be to our benefit, at least initially. So, did you have a second question? What you got? I didn't mean to take your second one. Then I'll get to Brian. He's
We pray, we donate, we demonstrate. What more can this group right here, or any other group like us, what can we really do? It doesn't seem, whatever we're doing doesn't really seem to be working. I don't, you know, I mean,
Well-
it's helping. It's helping. Obviously, there are many abortions that have been prevented with our efforts, but
you know.
what can we do?
You know, engage others. If you have family and friends that have not been engaged on this issue, that have not worked on this issue, and I would say don't disregard all those things that you've been doing, because I can say, standing here, I never expected Roe to be overturned in my lifetime. I just didn't. I didn't. You know, and I think some have been optimistic, but I think there are a lot of folks in my boat that never would have even expected we got to this point. And so, don't, you know, I don't want to be a downer. So you know, I would say still have hope. Is that, you know, we know how the story ends as Catholics. We know how the story ends. That doesn't mean the journey there is going to be nice and fun and sunshine. But you know, also, you know, be thinking of that ultimate destination of, you know, why are we here, and don't, you know, don't get discouraged, because the prayers, the work, all of that has made a difference in this state. And as I said, you know, it's looking not great now, but we went from 20,000 abortions in the state in, you know, 1980 or 81 to, you know, fewer than 4,000. Then it was fewer than 2,000. Then it was almost nothing. So, you know, do not sell yourself and others short of progress has been made. So, did you have? Yeah, Project Rachel. Rachel's Vineyard. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, there are good ministries out there, and again, that's another part of it. Is, you know, I like to say we're both and. We're not an either or here in the church. And you know, for those that say, well, you want to protect the child in the womb, but what about the mom? We're there for her. What about the child that's born that's in poverty? Well, you know, let me tell you about that. We're here for them. What about, you know, the refugee, the migrant? What about the prisoner? What about, well, I like to say my superpower is I'm immune to whataboutisms, and I don't care. You know, but I also think that as Catholics we can very much say, yeah, we do that too. Now that doesn't change logically. That doesn't change the morality of what we're talking about here. But we do that as well, you know, and I've said that in hearings before of, you know, you'll have folks that say, well, you know, anti-abortion, but where are you on pick your, you know, your social issue that would help moms, or, you know, or children, and you know, and I have been able to sit down and go, you know, first of all, that just makes me a hypocrite. That doesn't change the morality of what we're talking about if I say I don't care about that person. But also, hey, the church has been doing that for a long time on helping the poor, helping the mom in need. And so, yeah, we're a both and we need to continue to do that, whether it's, you know, services to help women not make the decision, to be there for support for the women that have. All of this goes together and is something that, you know, like I say, we don't always get it right, but the church has done a pretty good job in this regard, I think, of trying to meet all of those needs. So first, this lady asked, you know, what more can we do to, you know, get where she needs to be about this, or, you know, where the Catholic Church needs to be. A whole lot happens before someone gets pregnant and wants an abortion. And those are social issues that are incredibly dear to my heart. You know, you have a justice system that does not take victims of rape seriously, victims of child sexual abuse. And I mean, I have no like complaint with you using, you know, woman having a child or trying to access an abortion. I think that people forget that sometimes there are children seeking an abortion. You have 9, 10, 11, you know, puberty is earlier and earlier. What is happening before these children are being sexually abused and sexually exploited that we can do to make a difference? You know, are we being our brother's keeper and saying, you know, hey, I'm a teacher, this doesn't seem right, things are, no, there's not enough of that. No, and you're right, but that goes back to, you know, we can do both, and we can be focused on those. You know, you're never going to eliminate every potential, every possibility, but from the public policy standpoint, is what can we do, again, to address the demand side, not the supply side, the demand side, and you know, there's usually something that's always gone wrong. How do we address that? How do we keep it from happening? You know, and that's pro-family policies, that's healthcare, that's, you know, everything is interrelated in this. So way in the back, Ann. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a combination of those that you know, maybe we have taken for granted that, oh, everyone knows it's alive. I also think, sadly, and this is probably the more depressing thought, is I think there's also a segment of people that we are now reaping the fruits of decades and decades of legalized abortion. To your point, that even if someone says, yeah, I know, you know, it's a human being, I've had a child, we've become so desensitized to on this issue because we have been living in a world where it has been legal, accepted, all of that. And I think we're just seeing the fruits of that as well, of this is what happens when, you know, a culture kind of allows for, you know, the elimination of their children, is that, you know, everyone should know this. I think most people deep down do know this. It's just we have become so desensitized to it, and that's kind of a sad thought. But I think also is part of it. So.
We also live in a nation that lacks like comprehensive sex education. I mean,
It's they're well, no, go ahead.
My son's 16 years old, and he's a junior in high school. And he made mention of a girl that's pregnant at school, or that it's somewhere in the periphery of their country. She had no idea how it actually happened. I mean,
Yeah,
you can laugh, but I mean, it
it's
is a legit thing. It's, his sex education was abstinence only.
well, and it's also the reliance upon, a school system to do that. That goes back to even, what are parents teaching their children? Are their parents around? As I say, all of these issues are interconnected, and so, I would just even say from the start, from the jump, if you're, if a child is only getting this or having to get this through the school system, which may or may not be doing a great job, there's a problem even there to start with. And so, yeah, I would say it's all sorts of issues. Yeah, I mean, it's a constant. It is a constant battle to try to. Yeah, yeah, and winning the narrative on it, of taking over the narrative on it, because they have co-opted so much of the language on that issue. So, I'll go back to Brian real quick because he's been so patient with his second question. Then I'll cut back this way.
And a real simple question. I assume every state has a Missouri Catholic Conference that you work easy with. Yes or no?
I should know this because I was just with a group of them. 40, it's like 42, 44. There are some of the southern states with lower Catholic populations that do not have a Catholic conference. I will say, just to be well, smart aleck, because I can. We only have one Missouri Catholic conference, but we got Catholic conferences. We got Catholic conferences all around. No, I think it's in the low 40s, and we collaborate as much as possible. After the vote in Ohio on Tuesday, I texted my counterpart, also named Brian, in Ohio, just to kind of, thinking of you, praying for you, that sort of thing. But also plan to be collaborating with him, and letting kind of the dust settle on what happened in the Ohio vote, and reaching out to him and seeing, from his perspective, what went right, what went wrong, from the perspective of the bishops. Were there things they thought they did well? Were there things they thought, oh, we could have done better? But we collaborate constantly. It is some of the best individuals I have ever met, and they one, make me feel very insignificant, to be among them, but two, just make me feel very blessed, because we're all going through the same thing. Whatever issues we have here in Missouri is the same thing that, for the most part. Now, I will joke with my counterparts in New York and California whenever I'm complaining about legislative issues that I'd still rather be here with my problems than being in New York or California Catholic conference. It's a little rough these days. They still allow the Catholics into the capitals there, but it's kind of a year by year sort of thing. But we collaborate on these types of issues all the time.
About your previous point about it's been 50 years of growth. So you'd think the same argument might be that side must be lackadaisical about their game plan. But am I the only one that thinks in Ohio, in Michigan, Kansas, what other states? I don't know.
Oh, Michigan.
That we've been outgained.
Yeah.
We've been outmarketed. We've been
Outfunded. Yeah.
And is there some kind of, how do we change that? How do we change, there's truth in labeling on soup, but yet
Are you asking me how to bring truth into the political process? I don't know that we have enough time. I, yeah, it's no. I mean, I would say from the perspective of like right now, what's going on is we are being outspent first and foremost, and I think, but it's not always money. I mean, but it's also we from the pro-life side have spent decades. We have always been the ones fighting to get what we got in the Dobbs decision, and not just not just legally, but I mean we've been fighting to reduce the number of abortions, all of those things. I mean to have Missouri fall in abort, that's not just legal regulation. That's we've built a culture of life here. But once that was taken away from the other side, they are more energized right now. Now, I agree with Kat. I don't know that they're necessarily all uniform in the state of Missouri, and I think that would be to our benefit. That I don't know that they quite know how they want to go about it strategically in the state, but as a general proposition, I would say, your pro-abortion side is they are motivated now. In much the same way we were after Roe. They've lost. They lost what they thought was a very gigantic battle, and they're here to fight. And so, we have to be ready. Whether it's resources, whether it's messaging, whether it's all of us working in tandem. I wish I had. If I had the right answer, I'd be making a lot of money in a lot of states right now. But it's there's. I'd like to sit here and go, truth will prevail. I just, in the immediate future, no one has been able to figure out how to present that message in a winning fashion. And I think it really is. They're motivated. They're angry. You have young women that are angry and confused and being told you can't get miscarriage treatment, which is false. You can't, how do you combat this, the story of a 10-year-old that's been sexually assaulted? I can sit here and make the logical and the moral argument with you all day long of that's still an unborn human being, that's still a child, we should not exterminate the life of a child. So many people I've already lost at the statement, a 10-year-old that's been sexually assaulted. How do you win that argument? How do you reach those individuals that, they may know it's a life, but we shouldn't make law based on the hard cases and the exceptions, but boy, they sure work, and they're sure tough to work against.
50 years, you got somebody that went through that and regrets it.
Yeah. My view is there should be someone as we work on this ballot initiative. I would love to find individuals that. I guess the other thing I would say, let me back up, is we are probably going to have some uncomfortable conversations and messaging discussions that we just haven't had. Our message has been very clear over the last decades of, it is a human life. Science shows us this. Our faith leads us, to the dignity question that all humans, have inherent dignity. But we have to, I think, at some point, and again, I'm speaking from the political point of view, we got to look at our strategy and, do we have to start reaching out and finding women that are, that maybe are pro-choice, that personally, or think that there should be a right, but this is still too extreme for them. Someone that has had a bad experience, that is willing to make the stand and say, listen, I think a woman should have a right to choose, but also they need to be in a clinic that's regulated, that's clean. There should be a doctor here. And this ballot initiative does none of that. And while we can't agree on anything else, if we're all sitting here touting women's health and women's rights and what's best for her, this ain't it. And those are the types of things we're going to have to do. But again. We're trying to figure it out. We are trying to figure it out, and people much smarter than me are trying to figure it out. And it's just, again, I say I feel blessed that we are in this position where we're having, a post-Roe discussion. but scared to death because this is somewhat uncharted territory. We've kind of moved beyond the, you know, the discussion, in my opinion, will have to be more than just what we've always said and always argued. And I say that again more as a lobbyist than, you know, because I still believe it is a human life, but from the political strategic standpoint of, I think our messaging is going to have to maybe cross over to some folks that we haven't been aligned with in the past, and message is going to have to look a little different in this way because, you know, we have our own folks. But how do you reach, the women that are just going to the polls in droves and creaming us at the polls on these votes? You know, how do you reach that individual that, you know, is willing to say, let's have them all instead of have none?
Well, I won't ignore, and it should be said, thank you to you and Tyler and Lou.
Oh, it's everyone before me. Like I said, I came in my first year at the conference. We passed the heartbeat bill that had the trigger ban, and it's just like just to be there. I didn't do anything. I was of no help, but it was, you know, all those individuals. It was the culmination of a lot of decades of hard work, and I go back to the, you know, don't find yourself saying, hey, you know, what could we do more? There's always more that can be done, but do not ignore the success that the prayer and the work and the effort has made, because, you know, I sit up here and talk about the law and I talk about the politics of it, but, you know, it's good to remember you don't get to where Missouri was just by changing the law. You know, and that's going to be the continuing battle going forward, is the hearts and minds question of, you know, let's say worst case scenario, let's say these get on, let's say one of these amendments, you know, they get the signatures to put it on the ballot and it wins. Battle same as before, is how do you reach these women? How do you reach these? We will have lost a political battle that I don't want to downplay that, but, you know, the work remains the same. We're still going to have unplanned pregnancies in difficult situations, regardless of the status of the law, good or bad. So, David?
I just want to remind everyone here that given worst case scenario, constitutional amendment, just like Ohio passes, we still have regulatory teeth, and we can still regulate that industry just like every other industry.
It depends on the language. We can always try to find ways. It will be difficult under some of these. I get your, you know, and we've kind of worked with that before. With, you know, how far can we go in regulation? You know, under, say, the Roe regime. The fear is currently with these is that if you kind of wipe out all of our laws, you know, if those are nullified, then you kind of have lost some of the regulatory basis from the legal standpoint. Now, that's not to say that you can't try to get back there. It really depends on the ballot language. So, you know, I would just say it depends, but it isn't, I say, a guarantee that we could get back to where we were right now, where we are now with it. Yeah. Yeah. I know you've been in those clinics, so yes. But also it depends on, you know, who's leading your regulatory agencies. But I would say my only caution would be you still have to have the law in place to allow for the regulation. So, Kathy.
They did not want to have the abortion, but of course they were forced into it. The thing is, it's usually incest, and when this is brought out, then
Yep.
Isn't that a lot? Didn't they win over a lot more than other states? Other states are blown out of the water, I believe.
Yeah, and I would,
High.
yeah, and I would,
It takes the door knocking and to actually go there and not go there and say, well, do you see this picture? This is an aborted baby.
yeah.
They're
No,
gonna shut the door in your face, but if you go there, like I'm taking training with Students for Life, you have a wagon, you got diapers and wipes, and you say,
Yeah.
hi, I'm in the neighborhood, I just wanted to let you know about My Life Clinic,
Yep.
Pregnancy Health Center, we'd like to give you some diapers, somebody, yeah. And I also wanted to let you know about the resources that are available there, free ultrasound, free pregnancy tests, most people don't even know it.
yeah,
And then you talk about it and you say, do you have any children? Any teens? Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know about it, but there's some initiative petitions going out, and if they do pass, your daughter can get an abortion, and you wouldn't even know it. Are you okay with that? Well, no.
yeah,
And these petitions, it actually, if you were up to the day before birth, a baby could be, brutally, well, I'm getting nervous now, but anyway.
no, I get what you're saying, and
That you can abort this baby up until the day before birth. Are you okay with abortion that extreme? Well, no, I think it should only be like about 12 weeks. Well, this is up until then, and there's nothing for 12 weeks. And if you vote for it, you just voted that could happen. You just voted that your daughter could get an abortion. You wouldn't even know about it. And you bring up all these different things. And you walk away, you give them a door hanger. They know it, and they're changing minds. They were changing minds like crazy in Ohio, but you got to do the work.
Yep.
We can't just go to our churches and say, don't do it. Just today, I was having lunch. I said, did you know about this? Oh, that won't happen in Missouri. We're a pro-life state.
yeah, and
I'm like, oh.
and that and it
One other thing.
oh sure,
You're talking about these abortions. Did you know that 50% of the abortions are repeat?
mm-hmm.
And do you know what stops a woman from having a repeat abortion? When she receives love and healing and support. So we could knock the abortion numbers down by 50%
Yeah.
if we just love on these women that have had abortions. And at Columbia Planned Parenthood, we stayed to the very end. We were there from the beginning to the end. When they walked out, we had a bag in our hand, and we said, please, we have this bag of information. No matter what happened today, honey, I care about
Yep.
you. I want to help you. Please, will you take this bag? There's information here that can help you.
Yeah.
And some would take it, some wouldn't, but we loved on them.
And you can speak to this much better than I can, but whenever I said, usually when someone is abortion minded, something has gone wrong or there's a need that needs to be fulfilled. Sometimes that right there it's just someone to go, what do you need? I can help you, and I love you. That, I mean, it's you don't know. To your point of going door to door, I agree. And that's what I'm curious about, is I know that, I've heard anecdotally that there were a lot of folks where, whether it was the parental choice, not parental choice, but the parental rights sort of discussion, other things, really seem to make a difference. And so that's something that I think we're just going to have to kind of, when Ohio starts to do the postmortem on all of this, see what worked and didn't. So.
One last thing, the support after abortion, my daughter works for them, it's called supportafterabortion.com. 80% of the women do not want a religious experience after they've had an abortion. They're looking for secular. If you give them a card that says supportafterabortion.com, they can call, they can text, they don't even have to see anybody in person, they can get it help. But if you go to the supportafterabortion.com,
Yeah.
you can get help for these women, and we pass out those cards on the sidewalk in Columbia.
Some of my friends that I have met over the years in the pro-life arena that are running the most successful pro-life ministries are ones that come at it from a secular point of view. Now, because for some, I'm the dude from the church coming. Of course I'm going to be against abortion, of course, because I want to repress someone, or I don't know what it is, but but I think what's interesting though is I'm thinking of a couple in particular that kind of come at it from a consistent life ethic, from a secular point of view, when you listen to them, it's very Catholic still. But you know, they don't come with maybe the baggage that I come with, saying, "Hey, I'm from the church." But it is interesting in that it is very Catholic in its approach. But I agree that in some instances they have more authority on this issue than we have. So, yes. Sure. Yep. Yeah, there's information out there if you want to look. Yeah, historically on any of these issues, you know, if you need to go to sleep sometimes that's the best way to go about it. So, yep. Sure. Sure. You know, it's tough to say still in early November. I can just kind of give you my best guess as what we'll be working on based on what's happened in past sessions. You know, for funding, we always keep an eye on the budget in regards to, and it is still, you know, abortion related, but family policy of our alternatives to abortion, our Show Me Healthy Babies, our Healthy Fatherhood Initiative. I may be messing up that name. You know, we have worked last session and actually prior sessions as well on extended Medicaid eligibility for postpartum women. Again, addressing you know, for those women that have had a child, we are very, very generous with our eligibility for, if you're pregnant, you know, to be able to access the Medicaid program. But you know, 60 days after you have your child, then the requirements go up. And so there was a push last few sessions on that we have been supportive of. Gosh, what else you know, and then there's also the fighting against bad ideas, not just fighting for good ideas, but we don't have all night. So it's not that there's ever any bad ideas that ever come across. But you know, those are the ones, you know, we took some heat, but you know, came out in favor of Medicaid expansion for the working poor. There's been some interesting movement, though, still with that, as there was legislation last year that addressed what's called the benefits cliff, meaning that if you're someone that is on assistance, but you know, you get a job, or maybe you have a low-paying job, but then you can you have the opportunity to get a raise or to basically move up the ladder. Well, the math sometimes doesn't work to where a small raise kicks you completely out of the benefits. And so what you're doing is you're discouraging work and you're keeping people in a cycle of poverty. And so there's been a lot of interesting movement. This is one of those kind of neat areas where you have Democrats and Republicans coming together on a particular unique you know, solution to a problem. You know, if you're more Republican minded, you go, hey, this is a way to get people not in a cycle of welfare and encourage work and encourage them to better themselves, but also, you know, from the left side of the aisle, you know, you don't feel like as though you're taking away someone's safety net completely. That was an issue we worked on very closely with Catholic Charities. You may know Deacon Tyler McClay that lobbies for them. He and I worked on that a little bit together with some of his folks in St. Louis. Big city lawyer, exactly, big city lawyer. So you know, those are kind of some other areas that we get in again of how can we address some of these issues, you know, from a bipartisan perspective. And, you know, again, we are for the dignity of work. There's dignity in work. And so how do you address poverty while also encouraging, you know, good work, but not, you know, getting rid of someone's safety net that is, you know, so those are just a few things. I'm sure whenever I leave from here, I'll go, oh, no, there were 5 or 6 other great bills that would have been so interesting to talk about. And I'm kind of, you know, But those are a few, a sample of some. Yep.
Pornography, are any legislators bringing that?
I worry that a lot of legislators are into it, but it's no. I know what you mean. We're not still recording, are we? I hope not.
Several states have passed,
We.
you know, ways of
Yep.
addressing it in terms of verifying ages for
Yep.
minors accessing porn sites. Is Missouri doing anything?
There have been attempts. You know, it started off kind of as more of your attempts to just like pass resolutions that really don't have any teeth, but just a resolution saying here are the harms of pornography, kind of starting there. Then we've had, I know Senator Braden, and I can't remember who else. We've had a couple of folks that have tried to lead the charge for some version of whether it's at the internet service provider level of saying, hey, if you're Mediacom, you're an internet service provider. If I go and buy my internet package through you, that I will get sort of a password to where I can lock it so that at their level, if I have a child on the computer using my internet browser or whatever, that you have to log in and try to add additional safeguards. That's been proposed. There have been difficulties with that. I think, and I'm no expert on this, but I know there have been some questions even from those that are kind of on our side of this issue of whether there were First Amendment issues with that. And I know that some states have come up with a more successful approach, and I'm blanking on whether it was the trying to get kind of that age verification. That there have been a few states that have kind of found a way by which some of the porn industry just said, hey, we're not going to operate in this state because of the barriers you put up. So. It's obviously one that we support of any way to make sure that children, are shielded from this, because as folks like to say, kids don't find porn tends to find them anymore. You can't get away from it. And some of the stories that you hear from medical professionals that have dealt with issues amongst, like say, violence with youth, with teenagers, with folks way younger than teen years, of acting out things they have seen. Those are some of the hardest hearings, and so there is at least an acknowledgement, I think, at least among some, that it's a problem to be addressed. I don't know that I can handicap really, what our chances of success are in the next few years, but hopefully we can take one of the models from, some of the states that have had success in this arena, where the companies just say, hey, you can't access from the state, or however it's gone. So, but yeah, it's one that, again, whenever I say all these things are kind of interrelated, so many come back to that scourge, amongst our men and stuff, especially, that, yeah, if there are ways to curb it. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, there's Covenant Eyes. There's, there are all sorts of things that can be done outside of the public policy realm as well, that have tried to address this. But to the extent that the legislature can do something, hopefully we'll see we'll be able to maybe latch on to some of the successes that other states have had as far as ideas on bills that we could propose. So. first and, oh, go. It's, yeah. 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 Yes, first and foremost, thank you, and I'm sorry, and you know, obviously, thank you for sharing that. I, I don't, I actually feel just kind of weird even trying. You know, I don't know that I can give you much from, but I agree that I think again it goes to, you know, I think we can always do a better job, and I know that there are organizations and you know looking at how do we help those parents that are in that situation where you know that we don't get so focused on one segment of mothers that we ignore the needs there of how to go through that situation so that your child you know how they go through it you know with dignity, with comfort, with support, with care, and no, just I think I can speak for the group. Know of our prayers, and no, thank you for sharing that, and that may be a good one to end on. So, what do you?
Thank you so much. I can't imagine how hard this is.
Oh, this is fine.
I don't envy your job, your position at all, but I've been with here at the cathedral for over 20 years. First as youth minister, and then went into adult faith formation. And every time I come to something like this, or I think about doing something like this, or having it, I think about who will be here. And I look at the age across the rooms here, and as we've talked about, you know, we need to talk about it. We're not talking about it in the schools. We're not talking about it in our parishes. It's not on social media. We aren't talking about it. And we have a generation of young people who don't even know they need to talk about it or don't even know they need to hear it. So we are the trenches. We're the army that needs to multiply and not give up and to continue to fight this fight, whether it's with Planned Parenthood, 40 Days for Life, wherever you feel like your niches, heart, wherever it is you feel like you're being called to, because I think we're all being called, and I think it's important that we answer that call in whatever way we can, financially, personally, giving a witness at a talk, whatever it is. Don't be afraid to answer that call. And the whole time I'm sitting back here, and the first person that always comes to my mind in these situations is Mary. So let us close with a Hail Mary and ask her to wrap her protective mantle around us, as we know the work we have to do is undaunting, and to help us not to lose hope. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you all for coming. Our goal tonight was to make sure that he was here, and this happened because we had to reschedule it. But we want Missouri Catholic Conference to go out throughout the diocese. So if you're from another parish and you want them to come,
Yeah, if I could give one quick plug, if you want to learn more about us and join our network, MoCatholic, mocatholic.org. You know, you can get on our email list, and when we send out action alerts. But also, I will say that we are planning to get into parishes. I think that I've got Kathleen here who runs our communications. She's going to be kicking me out the door. very soon to go hit parishes all across the country. So we're going to make a concerted effort. Please
Look for more to come from Missouri Catholic Conference. Thanks, Jamie.
That show me the home life. I could. Thank you, sir. Yeah. I like their subject.